Rosalind Keynote with me today, and she's going to be discussing her childhood survival in Poland and occupied Poland. So welcome, Rosalind. And maybe you can give our audience at the start of our talk here today a little bit about that background of your childhood, a little bit what was going on during that time, and we'll get everyone caught up.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to speak a little bit about my family's history and share some of my own history. I was born in Lodz, Poland, just prior to the end of World War II in occupied Poland. So many of the parts of Poland were still occupied, and the Nazis were still fighting the Allies in Germany and other places. My mother escaped from the Kluge complex of camps, specifically one of the camps called Gold Pills, and this was a complex of 12 to 22 camps, depending on how many workers they had at the camp. And when I say workers, I'm talking about slave laborers. I'm a child survivor. I'm also a child of survivors. I've always considered that sort of a double whammy because I've got both their trauma and my own trauma to have healed. And thankfully, I have developed different processes throughout my life to go through that healing process. But we originated then in Poland, and then from there went to Germany. So I spent the first 2 years of my life in Germany. So I know by the age of 2, I had not mastered, but was doing gibberish in about 3 or 4 different languages. Yiddish was my first language. Polish was my second language. German was my third language. And I picked up some English because my father knew some of the GIs. He was working for the Joint in Germany. So we left Germany on a ship called the Ernie Pyle. I don't know if anybody out there knows who Ernie Pyle was. He was a journalist during World War II, and he was killed during the war. So already there's a kind of a metaphor there that we needed to be aware of. But we boarded the Ernie Pyle, which sunk in the ocean as we were leaving Germany. Ship is sinking. We're on a sinking ship. There is a New York Times article that was published April 2nd, 1947. That's the year that we left Germany. And this article states that there were about 100 orphans, children on the ship. So it was a kind of a big deal when we finally arrived in America. But I have to backtrack now. So we're returning to whatever harbor we had to return to, and then got on the Marine Marlin and successfully journeyed to America, landing in Boston Harbor exactly on my 2nd birthday. I was 2 years old when we landed. Apparently, I was very, very ill on the ship, and as we all, I guess, were. But we were passengers. We were not on the bottom of the ship because my father had actually paid for our tickets because he had been employed in Germany for the first 2 years of my life. So we had pretty good accommodations, but we were still all sick when we landed. People were throwing gifts at me, knowing it was my birthday, and also a lot of people on the shore were waiting for the refugee children, the orphans, because they were being adopted. So it was a very exciting moment, apparently, I'm told. And one of the things that was given to me was a little 14-karat gold ring, which I proceeded to lose at the Terminal movie theater when I was about 14 years old, unfortunately. But that was one of the gifts that was given while we had landed. So it was a very big deal. And of course, having it be my birthday, I think it was probably one of the greatest birthday presents I ever had, is coming to America back then. So we from in grade school, I started at the age of 4 years old. My mother sent me to kindergarten at the age of 4. I was pretty smart, I guess, and she thought, well, this is a good babysitter for me because she had just had a child, my sister. So I started kindergarten and I was speaking in all these different languages and I knew very little English and the teacher didn't know what to do with me. So she flunked me. So I flunked kindergarten and which was the smartest thing she could have done. So I had I repeated kindergarten and then I caught up with the age of the other kids by first grade, at which point I was elected the student council representative and I was out, I was speaking and writing and reading English at the top of the class by first grade. All worked out okay. So eventually we moved to Skokie, which was a very, it was a community where I've never experienced anti-Semitism growing up. The reason being, when we lived in Chicago, the communities were very diverse. I lived on the west side of Chicago when we first came there, very diverse. I had friends of all colors, never saw them as different in terms of being different kinds of people. And then from there, when we moved to Skokie, it was mostly Jewish. I went to Niles Township High School, which was like 99% Jewish, and a huge Holocaust population. The most of my parents' friends, in fact, I think all of my parents' friends were Holocaust survivors and refugees, and I babysat their kids because I was the eldest of the second generation, obviously, and I was the youngest of the survivors. Although at that time, nobody was calling me a survivor. That happened much later. But I was, the babysitter for many of the survivors, and I didn't know much about what was happening during World War II. Nobody talked to me about it. I overheard comments which sounded very fragmented and had no particular order or consistency or sequence. I didn't really understand what this war was all about. And by the way, the word Holocaust was never mentioned when I was growing up. I never heard that word. I heard the word war. But then I started asking questions because I would hear the stories that my parents' friends were saying, and they spoke, my father spoke 7 languages, my mother spoke 5 languages. All of us were multilingual. But the stories that I heard seemed very fragmented, and I just didn't understand what this war was all about. I knew one thing. I didn't have grandparents and I didn't have family. But not having family, not having grandparents, I started asking questions at a fairly young age. Where are my grandparents? Why don't I have grandparents on either side? So 9 or 10 when I started asking those questions. And I think when I read the Diary of Anne Frank, I started understanding that this war was not a very typical kind of war fought between 2 armies. This was a war that was intentionally killing children and people. And then I started grasping what was happening.
Were your parents willing to talk to you at length about?
We never spoke about it. Never. Okay. I will have to qualify that. There wasn't a moment in time when my mother mentioned something about it, and she had made some comments about it, but we didn't have a conversation about it. It wasn't like this was going to start a conversation. She just had some comments about it, and there was an incident where, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, where I found a photograph in a drawer. It was a junk drawer with a lot of photographs, and I took it to my mother and I asked her, "Who is this? This was an infant," and she said, "Don't ever speak about this to your father." No explanation, just don't ever speak to your father about it. Years later, I understood what this photo was. This was my father's daughter from his first marriage. they were both executes. So anyway, I had a fabulous professional career throughout my adult life. Fabulous. And I was very lucky, and I've been very lucky most of my life. I have to say that, I don't feel that my family just survived. We thrived. All of us did, successful. And I retired at the age of 56 and have been a full-time working artist since then and a writer. So I've been really pursuing my creative passions from that point on. So I've had published, my writing has been published in books, different. I have 2 art shows coming up, one in June and one in August. So I'm busy still exhibiting. And, as long as I can, I'm going to do. I mean, I'm just going to keep doing as long as I'm physically and mentally capable. Thankfully, I think I still have my faculties. Sometimes I wonder if I do, but I think I do. And I've had many blessings in this life, many, many blessings in this life. And I tend not to focus on the negative. I prefer to follow my counsel that I had to my clients, to my patients. Focus on what you can do. Focus on the positive. Let's put our attention on that. Let's see what we can do with that. And I was an effective counselor. And years and years ago, I was also an art therapist at a psychiatric facility. So I saw the healing power of art. And I knew the healing power of art making because I started doing art when I was like a toddler. According to my mother, I was doing it at the age of 2, which meant I was giving myself art therapy from a very, very early age. And we now know neurologically that doing art or doing music or listening to music, let me just say one more thing about that. It changes the brain because it stimulates the neurons, the pathways that are called the pleasure-making pathways. And so doing art, which I was doing from a very early age, I think helped to heal whatever trauma there was. And that's important.
That's what I want to draw out. I mean,
yeah,
trauma. You obviously went through a lot of trauma through the Holocaust. But I'm interested because a lot of our audience, since I've been doing these projects, I have found that trauma is a huge part of the second generation, the third generation lifestyle. I also grew up with trauma, even though most of my parents, who were survivors, never spoke at all. It was verboten. So when I started the programs in 2021, I created a series of programs called Into the Light, Discovering Intergenerational Survivor Trauma. You made
epigenetics and all of that, yeah.
And I've done quite a bit of programming and films on this topic. So I want to tap into, you helping our audience with, and since you have such a therapeutic background, it would be helpful to spend a little time for you explaining to the audience how they may be helped by picking up a pencil,
Don't even need to do that. Don't even need to do that.
All right?
Just looking at art, just listening to music will create the same process as doing art and playing music. And that's neurological. And they have tested that with spectrography. They've tested the brain and what happens to the brain when both doing art and looking at art. So I taught a class, 3 classes last summer in, it was 3 parts to each class: doodling, collage, and monoprinting. And I had my students put all of those processes together to do the art. And all I wanted to achieve, I don't want to create great artists. All I wanted to achieve was, how do you feel while you're doing this? And how do you feel when the class is finished? And the one word that I heard over and over again was joyful. So it does something to the brain, it does something to the disposition, to the hormones, everything. And I knew what it was doing for me all the years that I was growing up, because, I didn't just have my parents' trauma, I had my own trauma. So from my mother's escape. So I know that doing the art was very healing for me. And of course, I did the, required therapy, which you have to do anyway as a counselor. But the act of doing the art has been extremely healing. And I saw the effect of it when I was working with patients in a psychiatric facility. I worked with these three women who were nonverbal, had them doing a group project in a punch needle rug making project. We sat around this empty space with the chairs around, and then this big frame was set on these other chairs, and they were punch needling this group project. By the end of maybe 6 weeks, they were speaking to each other, and not conversations, but a word here, a word there. It was, I thought, miraculous. Were three women who had never spoken a word for like 22 decades.
I think you may know this, but I'm not 100% sure. In March of 2024, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And I was on a daily chemotherapy.
I'm sorry.
And it wasn't pleasant. It made me really sick. And that trickled into a depression that I had because of my trauma that I carry with me. And my therapist suggested similar things as you were talking about. So I'm very close to this. She suggests, since I wasn't doing anything creatively, I've given up all of my projects. I just couldn't be motivated. And she suggested that but I am a technologist, and my career has been in technology. And so she suggested that I use my iPad and get a drawing program, which is called Procreate.
Yes, absolutely great.
And so I started to take online tutorials on how to create art on Procreate, and it was sort of one of 2 or 3 triggers that actually got me out of my depression. And I'm thankful now. I'm in a bit of a remission from my leukemia, which I'm thankful for.
Great, wonderful.
And, ever since, many people. So I think, speaking again to our audience who are struggling with trauma, specifically, we have a second generation, survivor, and third generation audience. Doing what you're suggesting and what I suggested, which is, most people have an iPad. You need an Apple stylus. The program on Apple.
Or just take a pencil and doodle. Yeah. Doodling is very powerful also. Just don't have to even draw a straight. In fact, you shouldn't draw a straight line when you're doodling. Just keep doing, watching TV, doodle. Watching computer, doodle. anytime you're sitting and there's a piece of paper in front of you and a pencil, doodle. I'm always doodling. I mean, I can hardly sit still without a pencil or a pen in my hand without doing some sort of art. And in fact, I have a painting that's going on an exhibit in about a week or two. And the name of the painting is Doodling 1 or 2 or whatever number it is. It's a 16 by 20 canvas painting, and it is strictly paint and doodles. And it's a really pretty painting, you know. It's just so people don't even have to have an iPad. They can just scribble and doodle, and it's very healing. And what you see are it's a darker picture than most of my paintings, but it's also homage to any war scene, all war. The second one is a picture of a mother and a child. The child is in the background, crying and screaming, and the mother is devastated. And this is also any war scene. The third one is a picture of these birds who are trapped. And this was a kind of a metaphor of those who are trapped behind, anyone who is trapped behind wire, whatever. So, I mean, it's all related to that and to 10/7 and to devastation, basically. Rock. It's a figure that is almost a skeleton sitting on a rock in a very depressed position, called Angst, and that's about the horror of all of it, and that's expressed almost like a Munch painting where he had the scream. That was kind of an inspiration for this. I want to show that there's a lot of varied art, because I don't just paint or do collage. I also do fiber art, and I also do silks. You know, I've made handmade paper, silk paper, and different fiber art. Much of it has been sold, but let's start at the beginning, and I want to talk about the 5 fish. The point I want to make is that I do not do trauma art. I do not do dark art. I'm not saying I don't have a few pieces that are like that. I do, very few. The art that comes out of me is very colorful, very joyful, even about horrific topics. Okay. This was an image in my mind that I could not get out of. And it was a story that was told to me about 5 escapees from a concentration camp, possibly the ones that my parents were in. And they were caught. And they were hung up on fish hooks or hooks and died a torturous, slow, torturous death. I could not get that image out of my mind, but I had to express it in the only way I could. And I expressed it through colorful collage. And so I think I still have the original painting, but I've sold quite a few prints, framed prints. Most people who buy the painting don't really know that much about the history of this painting. But that is kind of the expressive part of me that has to make it beautiful, that has to turn it into something.
Well, that's how you've brought your trauma down. So
that's how I process, yeah, right?
You've leaned into your art to
exactly
your trauma.
Exactly. So here's the thing that was interesting that my art teacher said to me, the first class I ever took in high school art, and she gave us this assignment for a still life. So what did I bring in? I brought in a dirty ashtray full of cigarette butts and ashes, and an old wine bottle that was crusted and ugly and filthy. And I had a dish rag that I put it onto, and I did an oil painting. And she said a comment that just stuck with me. She says, "You turn whatever's ugly into something beautiful." But that is her profile. She was a beautiful woman, And
What was your mom's name?
Vera. So this is a profile of Vera. That is a collage of a village. That painting is sold, but I have prints of it, and the prints are available on Fine Art America to get framed prints if you want. But that is just an image of a village that's somewhere in my subconscious, I think.
Is it in Poland?
Could be, because I've been to Poland. Could be Lodz, could be Vilna. My parents were from Vilna. I don't know Vilna. I haven't been to Vilna, but somewhere in my subconscious, there may be that imagery. Art for me comes mostly from what I feel and express internally, but not from what I see necessarily. But that's Chicago. That painting is sold. That is the Chicago, the Loop, downtown Chicago.
Mhm.
And those are just trees, birch trees. I like trees.
What was the inspiration?
I love nature. I love trees. I have a lot of them in my yard. I just love nature.
Any of these other ones that are in your dreams from that
Sedona. That one's Sedona.
Oh, very nice.
Piece of that was of me. That is inspired by a trip to Thailand and the beautiful flowers there. Trees, as you can, and that is a multi-layered fiber piece, which is punch needle.